We're here at CyberScoop's Zero Trust Summit with Michael Epley, Chief Architect and Security Strategist at Red Hat. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure to join you.
So how would you say that OMB's Zero Trust requirements for agencies to adopt enterprise-wide platforms for identity and access management, for example, and multifactor authentication, how has that impacted government contractors and IT providers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because as we're looking to adopt Zero Trust, and MFA is an important part of that because we need strong credentialing systems to verify identities so that as we interact with our systems repeatedly, we can rely on those identities and we can re-authenticate and reauthorize folks constantly. Of course, MFA has long been used in the federal government. We've got CACs and PKI and PIV systems already. But we're also seeing changes in IT, especially around like remote work, where we're having now remote devices that we have to manage and manage the multi-factor authentication for that. So we need more solutions for that, plus the impact of mobile devices and mobile device solutions, which, for example, it's hard to use a PIV card with your iPhone. And so we need to develop new approaches for doing that. And those approaches are still being explored by various agencies. But we're looking for ways that we can use those different types of credentialing systems across these different devices. NIST, for example, is looking at updating its PIV standards and has been working on that and providing an update to that standard recently. And we expect to see that soon, but we're going to still continue to see a lot of exploration around that. The other big thing that we're going to have to start doing with these identity systems is integrating them more broadly across our enterprise systems. We can't rely on individual systems to have different identity systems. We're going to have to start federating those. We're going to have to be able to start to rely or integrating those systems so we can have single source of identity and truth about those actors. So we can take advantage of the context of those interactions the actors have across our entire enterprise, not just on a single system.
And then what challenges do you see government agencies still facing trying to maintain a complete inventory of authorized devices and ensure that endpoint protection and response tools are, really properly deployed?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because inventorying our IT systems has been a challenge for a long time. It's one of the key points of our CISO and OMB guidance that they've issued. Is one of the first steps of getting to Zero Trust is just understanding your IT enterprise, inventorying all your assets and your systems. Again, because we want to understand where the context of our actors are as they move through our systems, interact with our systems, so we can develop risk-based authentication schemes. If we have different actors working with different parts of our IT systems, we want to know that so that we can say, hey, these actors are either trying to, the bad actors moving laterally in our systems, interacting with these systems in different ways. And of course, we need to have that inventory so we can do things like deploying endpoint detection so we can collect that context information for that purpose. And yeah, we can't deploy endpoint detection against and response mechanisms if we don't know what those systems are. Of course, inventorying these systems, encompasses more than just, personal devices or network devices. Zero Trust, of course, is a multi-domain approach. So we have to do network, we have to do identity systems like our credentials. What credentials do we have in our identities are using throughout our systems? So there's lots of different parts of what we have to inventory. And we're being asked under Zero Trust concepts to do inventory a lot more of these domains than maybe we historically had in the past.
And then how well equipped would you say federal agencies are today compared to, say, a couple of years ago to quickly identify and isolate segments of their IT environments that may have been compromised?
Well, that's a great question, especially the Zero Trust context, because in some sense, Zero Trust is built on the concept of assuming a breach. And in that case, we want to continue to operate even when there's a breach in our systems. We don't necessarily want to isolate systems. The whole purpose of Zero Trust is to create essentially microsegmentations across our networks that protect our external systems when a breach does occur. So in some sense, the response isn't to isolate. It's always operate assuming that our systems need to be isolated and that are already breached, and we protect our systems accordingly. But the government, of course, has long, and the security community has long relied on techniques like isolating or exposed systems or breach systems in order to respond. So we still do that from a response perspective when we do detect a breach. In Zero Trust, and the microsegmentation processes and techniques are going to allow us to do that more effectively. The other thing that Zero Trust is going to ask us to do is, again, under the assumed breach, is to individualize access requests. And of course, those requests are going to be denied occasionally. We're going to have to start designing our applications and our systems so that they can operate when those systems and those accesses are denied. So that's essentially a logical isolation. And Zero Trust is going to help us get to the point where we can isolate our systems without business disruption, without necessarily causing secondary effects that we can't predict or control, because our systems are designed from the outset to understand and react accordingly to that.
That's a great point. And then lastly, Mike, looking ahead, how are OMB's zero trust policies altering the investment strategies of government contractors and firms like Red Hat?
Yeah, I mean, Red Hat has, I think, a great perspective here, because we are seeing a lot of these requests and working with the government agencies as they're trying to understand what zero trust means and what it implies. And I talked about some of the things that it does imply with your previous questions. I guess, what that investment is really doing is focusing us on technologies, architectures, and techniques that we can use and apply to do things like microsegmentation, do things like identity and access authorization at a fine-grained level. So they're looking at, for example, identity solutions. There's an increased focus, for example, on systems that have real fine-grained RBAC controls, systems that are secure by default out of the box. A good example in Zero Trust is we talk about least privilege a lot in Zero Trust. So systems that deploy out of the box with minimal privileges or default configurations that have those privileges finally broken out. So for example, an admin user isn't actually a true admin user. You have to escalate your privileges to do things like backups, restore operations, changing configurations, and those privileges don't come out of the box turned on. You have to explicitly turn those on, and ideal in a zero trust world, you'll turn those back off when you don't need them again. So for example, Red Hat has already looked at our product portfolio and some of our technologies like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Now we're taking away default credentials. For example, in RHEL, it doesn't ship now with remote SSH turned on out of the box. You have to turn that on explicitly and then enable that capability. So that's one way we're reacting to that as part of that kind of encompassing and embracing zero trust. And then other things that we're doing is building in microsegmentation into our cloud platforms. For example, OpenShift. We added support for a service mesh a couple years ago, and that's a key technology and enabler for zero trust. And we're seeing that as a big focus of folks that are interested in deploying zero trust solutions today, because it gives you that microsegmentation at a software-defined network level, essentially out of the box for you. And so as we're seeing people move into the cloud, these kind of solutions are going to be critical for our customers to deploy.
Well, Mike Epley, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to join us here and share some of your observations.
Thanks, it was my pleasure.